Look at this one. Did you get dressed in the dark, or do you just not own a mirror? He said it from the doorway of the executive suite. He said it the way someone tells a joke at a party, expecting the room to laugh along, checking to see who would. Three junior associates stood in the corridor behind him. One of them laughed. The other two looked at the floor. Celeste Fontaine Okafor stood in the executive corridor with her cleaning cart, her back straight, a small tear along the left seam of her work shirt, and the particular calm of a woman who had heard worse and survived it and had no plans to let this ruin her Tuesday. She looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't shrink. She looked at him the way you look at someone you have already assessed and found to be smaller than they believe they are. "Excuse me," she said, and moved her cart 3 inches to the right so he could pass. He walked past her. He was still talking. The associates followed. One of them glanced back at her, and his expression was not the expression of a man who thought what just happened was funny. Celeste kept working. 29 people were on the 41st floor of Mercer Adelman Capital that morning. 19 of them were in the corridor or inside of the corridor when Derek Paulson said what he said. 19 people who said nothing. She had no idea that every single one of them would witness something very different before noon. She had no idea that the people currently walking past her, the board of directors of Mercer Adelman Capital, arriving for their quarterly session in 41 minutes, would not simply acknowledge her when they stepped off the elevator. They would bow, not as a gesture, as a recognition. Have you ever been mocked for what you were wearing when you were wearing the only thing you had? Have you ever been someone's punchline in a hallway while carrying more in your head than they would manage in a lifetime? Stay. This is for you. Let me take you back. 48 hours earlier, the tear in the work shirt had happened on Sunday. Celeste was loading her car. She drove herself to each job site, which was unusual for contract cleaning staff, but which she had negotiated specifically because she needed the flexibility. And the cart had snagged on the door frame, and she had turned quickly, and the seam had given. A 3-inch tear left side below the collar. Not structural. Not visible from the front. She had sewn it that evening. A careful line of small stitches, navy thread on navy fabric. The kind of repair that would hold, but that you could see if you were looking for it. She had not expected anyone to look for it. But Derek Paulson looked for a great many things that were wrong with the people around him. It was his primary skill. Celeste was 57 years old. She had been a contract cleaner for the past 6 years. Before that, she had been a great many other things. A fact that the building's management company had on file in her contractor profile had anyone ever thought to read it. She had been a biochemist. She had spent 19 years at a pharmaceutical research firm, first as a researcher, then as a senior scientist, then as the head of a small innovation team that had contributed work to 2 patent filings that were still generating royalty income for the firm. She had left the firm in 2016, not because she had been pushed out, but because her husband had died. Suddenly, a Tuesday morning, a commute, a truck that ran the light, and she had needed to stop, to reset, to find a way to be in the world that didn't require her to bring everything she had to a laboratory every morning when she was still learning how to breathe. She had started cleaning because it was honest work, and it moved her and it kept her out of her own head. She had told very few people what she had done before. Not because she was ashamed of either life, but because she had found, after a long time of thinking about it, that the people who couldn't see her without the credentials were not actually seeing her even then. They were seeing the credentials, and she was not her credentials. She was Celeste. Her hands were careful. Her eyes were good. She moved through a building the way someone moves through a building when they know things about it that the people who built it don't. The way light changed on the west side in winter, the draft from the freight elevator, the ventilation problem on the 40th floor that had been written up 3 times without being fixed. She wore a small pendant on a fine gold chain around her neck, a disc the diameter of a quarter with an engraved design on its face, a helix, double and intertwined, etched into the gold with the precision of something made with intention. Her husband had commissioned it for their 22nd anniversary from a craftsman in Accra. It was the last gift he gave her. She wore it every day, tucked inside whatever she was wearing against her skin. Not for show, for proximity. On the Tuesday when Derek Paulson found it necessary to comment on her shirt, the pendant was visible. The cart had jostled it when she was moving it off the elevator, and it had swung free of her collar. She hadn't noticed. He had. "Nice chain," he said on his way past her after the first comment about the shirt. Said it with the voice he used when he meant the opposite. "What did that run you, $100? he was wrong. He was wrong in the way that people are wrong when they have decided the answer before they looked at the question. But that is not the important part of what he got wrong. The important part was this: he had not recognized the helix. Derek Paulson was the head of operations for Mercer Adelman Capital. He had a master's degree in business and 12 years in financial services operations and a very clear map in his head of who belonged in each part of his building. He did not have a science background. He had no reason to recognize a double helix engraved on a gold pendant worn by the woman pushing the cleaning cart. Margaret Adelman did. Margaret Adelman was one of the founding partners of Mercer Adelman Capital. She was 73. She had trained as a molecular biologist before she moved into biotech investment in the 1980s, and she had spent 40 years building a firm that specialized in exactly the intersection of science and capital that most traditional finance had been slow to understand. She was not loud. She was not often in the press. She was, in the estimation of everyone who had worked with her for more than 6 months, the most precise thinker in any room she entered. She had known Celeste's work, not Celeste. She had not known Celeste personally, but she had known the work. She had read the papers. She had followed the patent filings. She had, in 2015, tried to recruit the team that Celeste was leading for a consulting engagement that would have been significant, and had been told, politely, that the team was not available. She had not connected the name on that contract profile with that researcher.
Why would she?
The name was common enough. The context was entirely different. And then, at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning, Margaret Adelman stepped off the elevator on the 41st floor, 41 minutes early for the board meeting, because she had always been early and believed that was the only way to see how a place actually ran, and she saw the pendant. She stopped. She said to the woman pushing the cart, "Excuse me, may I ask where you got that?" Celeste looked up. She tucked the pendant back inside her shirt reflexively. "It was a gift," she said. "The design," Margaret said. "Is that the Fontaine helix?" Celeste said. And then, because the woman in front of her had recognized it, which almost no one did anymore, she said the rest of it. "My husband named it for me. We worked on the initial model together in 1999. It was his design and my mathematics." The hallway was quiet. Margaret Adelman looked at her for a long moment. "Celeste Fontaine," she said. Not a question. "Fontaine Okafor," Celeste said. "I took his name when we married." The pause that followed was not awkward. It was the pause of a person reorganizing everything they thought they knew about the situation they were standing in. "Will you come in?" Margaret said. "Before the meeting. I'd like to talk." Celeste looked at her card. She looked at the corridor. She thought about Derek Paulson and his assessment of her shirt. "I have about 20 minutes before I finish this floor," she said. "20 minutes is fine," Margaret said. "Come find me." What happened in that conference room in the 22 minutes before the board meeting started was not public. But 2 members of the board spoke about it afterward in ways that were careful and partial and sufficient to form a picture. Margaret Adelman had called up the patent filings on her laptop. She had set them on the table between herself and Celeste. She had asked 3 questions: technical, specific, the kind that could only be answered correctly by someone who had been in the room when the work was done. Celeste had answered all 3. Quickly, precisely, with the particular ease of someone recalling something they had thought about so many times it lived in the body rather than the memory. Margaret had then made 1 call from that conference room table to the managing director of a biotech investment fund that Mercer Adelman had been cultivating as a strategic partner for 2 years. She had said 4 sentences. The managing director had said 2 sentences back. Margaret had hung up. She had looked at Celeste and said, "We have a problem in this building that you may have experienced this morning. I'd like to address it." Celeste had said calmly, "I noticed." The board meeting began at 11:55. The 7 members of the board of directors of Mercer Adelman Capital took their seats. Margaret Adelman, who chaired the board, introduced the agenda items in her usual order. And then, before the second item, she asked the room for a brief indulgence. She asked Celeste Fontaine Okafor to come in. Celeste came in through the conference room door. She had straightened her shirt. The tear was still there. The pendant was visible again, outside her collar, the engraved helix catching the light. Margaret introduced her. She said Celeste's name, her credentials, her field, the work she had done. She said it the way you say something that deserves to be said properly, without rush, without qualification, giving every syllable its weight. Then she turned to the board. I want this firm to understand something, she said. The person who has been cleaning this floor for the past 3 months is one of the most significant biochemical researchers of the past 30 years. She is a published scientist, a patent contributor, and a person whose work in molecular structure modeling influenced research that is currently in clinical trial at 2 pharmaceutical firms this board has invested in. She paused. This morning, she was mocked in this hallway by a member of our management team, in front of colleagues, loudly, for her clothing. Nobody moved. That is not who we are, Margaret said. And I want the board to recognize formally who is standing in this room. They. The 7 members of the board of Mercer Adelman Capital stood up. They bowed. It was not choreographed. It was not a performance. It was the spontaneous, unanimous response of 7 people who had just been told something that reordered their understanding of the room they were in, and who felt, in that moment, the weight of what had happened in the hallway and what it meant that none of them had been there to stop it. Celeste stood at the door and looked at them. She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman in public. But the pendant at her throat moved when she swallowed, and that was enough. Thank you, she said. Quiet, steady. Then she said, I have to finish my floor, and she went back to work. Derek Paulson was called into a meeting at 2:15 that afternoon. The head of human resources was there. The general counsel was there. A transcript of 3 witness accounts of the hallway incident was on the table. He began by explaining. He moved to contextualizing. He arrived eventually at apologizing. The apology was noted. The investigation was opened. The witnesses, all 3 associates who had been in the hallway, gave accounts that were consistent with each other and with what the transcript described. The associate who had laughed gave the longest account and was the most visibly uncomfortable. He had clearly been thinking about it for 6 hours and had not arrived anywhere comfortable. Derek Paulson was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was conducted. The investigation concluded in 12 days. The findings were not made public, but Derek Paulson did not return to Mercer Adelman Capital in any capacity after those 12 days. The firm issued an internal communication to all staff. It did not name names. It described a set of behavioral standards and a new reporting mechanism and a formal commitment to a workplace culture review that would be conducted by an external consultant. It was specific where most such communications are vague, and the people who knew what had happened understood why. Mercer Adelman also made another announcement, external and public. They were launching a STEM to Finance Fellowship program, a structured 18-month track for researchers and scientists transitioning into financial services. It was the recognition, finally articulated, that some of the best thinking about biotech investment came from people who had actually done the science. The program was named the Okafor Fellowship, named for Emmanuel Okafor, who had died on a Tuesday morning on a commute and who had commissioned a gold pendant with a helix for his wife's 22nd anniversary, and whose name now appeared on a program that would bring scientists into rooms where they could do the most good. Celeste had approved the naming. She had said only one thing when Margaret asked her about it. She had said he would have liked that. 2 years later, the 4th class of Okafor Fellows completed their training. 16 people, biologists, chemists, a materials scientist, 2 epidemiologists, who had made the translation from bench to boardroom through a program that treated their scientific training not as a liability to be explained away, but as the exact thing that made them valuable. The 4th class included a young woman named Adeze, 29, a biochemist from Enugu by way of Johns Hopkins, who had spent 3 years telling finance firms that her research background was an asset and being told, politely and sometimes not politely, that it wasn't quite what they were looking for. At the orientation ceremony for the 4th class, Celeste Fontaine Okafor spoke. She was no longer a contract cleaner. She was the scientific advisory director of Mercer Adelman's biotech portfolio, a role that had been created for her after a conversation with Margaret Adelman that had started in a hallway and continued for 2 years. She wore a good suit. The tear in the work shirt had been long since retired, but the pendant was there, outside her collar, the helix catching the light the way it always did. She told the 4th class what she told every class. She told them about the helix, about Emmanuel, about the Tuesday morning, about the way grief can make you put down the work you loved and pick up different work. Not because the work you loved was gone, but because sometimes you need to do something with your hands that doesn't require everything. She told them about the hallway. She told it without drama, because it wasn't drama. It was a man in a doorway who had confused a torn seam for a life's worth. She told them that the pendant was the most important thing she owned, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. A record of work done in love and precision, of thinking that had taken years and nights and arguments, and the specific friction of two minds disagreeing productively until they found something better. She told them that what was in that pendant could not be mocked away, that what they carried, their training, their rigor, their years of learning to see things that required years of preparation to see, could not be taken by a comment in a hallway. She told them finally about Margaret Adelman stopping in the corridor and asking about the pendant, about the 20 minutes in the conference room, about being recognized not by her title or her address or the clothes she was wearing, but by the precision of the work she had once done. She told them, "The right person will see the helix. Keep wearing it." Then she sat down. The room was quiet. Then Adeze, in the front row, raised her hand and asked if she could look at the pendant. Celeste leaned forward and held it out. Adeze cupped it in her palm and looked at the engraved helix, double, intertwined, precise, and looked up at Celeste. "My grandmother would have understood this," she said. "She was a midwife. She always said the body knows how to build itself. You just have to learn to read the instructions." Celeste looked at her for a long moment. "Write that down," she said. "That's the beginning of something." If this story stayed with you, please like it, share it, subscribe, and hit the bell. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to carry your most important work somewhere no one could see it? Have you ever been reduced to the surface of yourself by someone who never bothered to look deeper? Leave it in the comments, every word. Here's what really gets me. It's the pendant. The helix! A disc the size of a quarter, worn against her skin, tucked inside the collar of a torn work shirt for 6 years. 6 years of going into buildings where no one knew, where no one asked, where the story she carried was invisible to everyone who looked at the cart and stopped looking. And then a woman came off an elevator early, 41 minutes early, because she believed in seeing how a place actually ran, and she saw the helix. That is not a miracle. That is not luck. That is what happens when you keep wearing the thing that is true about you, even in the places where no one can read it yet. The people who tried to diminish Celeste Fontaine Okafor did not diminish her. They could not. Because what she was not located in the shirt or the cart or the corridor. It was located in the helix, in the mathematics, in the years of work done at a table beside a man she loved, building something that outlasted him and would outlast this building and every hallway in it. He called her out for a torn shirt. He didn't know he was standing 3 feet from a woman whose work was in the bodies of people being healed right now, in clinical trials, in hospitals he would probably never set foot in. He didn't know, but she knew. And the question I want you to carry tonight is this. What do you know about yourself that the hallway can't touch? What is your helix? The thing you carry tucked against your skin that the right person will recognize when they stop and look. Because the Derricks of the world will keep talking. They will always keep talking. The question is whether you keep wearing the thing that is true about you. I think you do. I think you already are. Tell me about your helix. I'll be in the comments all week.